Good morning. My name is Patrick Marcinko. I'm a financial advisor at Bogart Wealth. I'm also a certified financial planner, and I want to welcome you to our webinar this morning about interest rates. For those of you who might be new to our firm, our mission is to help clients achieve financial peace of mind by preserving and maximizing intergenerational wealth. A little bit more background on us. We have about $2.9 billion of assets under advisement and approximately $2.7 billion of assets under management. And we work with roughly 1,300 households. We are a registered investment advisor, which means we are an independent fiduciary advisor working in your best interest. We use Charles Schwab as our custodian, and we are a fee-only wealth management firm. Here is our leadership team, including our founder, James Bogart. Bogart Wealth has financial advisors located in both McLean and Houston, and we work with clients in numerous states all across the country. Our firm has an in-house investment management team. This group primarily sits in our Virginia office. We also have a full operations and financial planning team here in our Virginia and Texas offices. Bogart Wealth's headquarters are located here in McLean, Virginia, where I'm sitting today. In addition, we have 2 offices in Houston, 1 in Gessner, and 1 in the Woodlands. Now, for those of you who work with us, you know that financial planning is at the heart of what we do. Most people think that planning for retirement really just encompasses the investments. But everyone's situation is a little bit different, and it's very important for us to focus on your goals and manage the issues that are important to you. Now, if you're new to Bogart and have not gone through our planning process, I encourage you to reach out to your advisor or myself, and we can talk specifically about what you and your family are working towards. Now, let's get started. So, we produce a number of educational webinars throughout the year. We invite you to join future webinars as well. On our website, bogartwealth.com, we do some recorded versions and also have previous webinars that you see on the screen. And we cover a wide variety of topics, from Social Security planning to tax planning to net unrealized appreciation, long-term care, mega backdoor. So if you're interested in any of those topics, please reach out to us and let us know. All right, let's get to the bulk of today's discussion. How do discount rates affect your lump sum? Now, when we're speaking about interest rates, I want to note that this presentation today is geared towards the ExxonMobil pension program. It could relate to someone who does not work at ExxonMobil, depending on what their pension options are, maybe how their company manages the pension. But today's webinar is going to give us really an idea of what interest rates are doing across the board and how they impact the various parts of the ExxonMobil pension program. Specifically, we are going to be talking about the qualified pension at ExxonMobil. So for some of you on the call today that have some of the non-qualified pieces, such as the APP or the SPP, this call is still relevant, but we're going to focus primarily on the qualified portion. What is important to note, though, is that interest rates affect all parts of the pension program. So one question that comes up is, which discount rate applies to me? For almost everybody here, all you need to remember is the general rule, and that is the rate that's in effect on your benefit commencement date will be the one that applies to you. The benefit commencement date is typically the first day of the month. It does not matter if the first day of the month is a holiday. So, for example, if you got the second quarter discount rate, the absolute latest your BCD would be June 1st. So by July 1st, you're already in the third quarter. Now, there is an exception to that rule, and I don't know if there are any grandfathered folks in the room or not, and we'll talk about the definition of grandfathered in a minute. Grandfathered in this situation comes from the Pension Protection Act of 2006. Now, for those grandfathered individuals, they have the option, if they choose the first available BCD, then they can choose the interest rate on their first day of retirement or the interest rate on their BCD. All that to say, what this really means is that an individual would have to make their last day of employment on June 29th, and this would result in their first day of retirement as June 3rd. They would be able to choose at that point whether they want the second quarter or third quarter rates. That being said, this applies to very few people on today's call, but there's still a number of different questions and confusion around that topic. Okay, so I've already mentioned the Pension Protection Act. This was passed in 2006, took effect in 2007. The most important part of this is that it places limits on companies who provide a lump sum pension option. So, for example, a pension has to be 80% funded in order to offer the 100% lump sum option. If the funding levels drop, then their lump sum options can change. Now, this is not the most common scenario, but it is important to note that. The Protection Act defines also the discount rates that are used. That's going to be a big focus of the next few slides. Notably, the Act talks about the adjustment from using Treasury rates to corporate bond rates. Additionally, it requires that companies update their actuarial tables every 10 years. There's some other items that changed, but some of them don't affect the lump sum pension option. So for those of you who were under 50 or had less of 10 years of service prior to 2008, these are the rules that will apply to you. Most of the folks today will fall in this category. Now, the new rates are tracked by using corporate bond rates, like I mentioned earlier, instead of government bonds, treasuries. This was a tougher change for folks that had the lump sum option because typically corporate bond yields are actually higher than government bonds. And as we'll cover in a few minutes, higher yields are not better when it comes to your pension in terms of getting the most out of it. Now, if you want to see what the current corporate bond yields are, you can actually see them on the IRS website using the link on my slide. And we'll cover this in a minute, but one of the key distinctions is that the rates we're using now are broken into 3 segments. And this is a very key difference from the prior rules. One more key update that we want to factor in is that companies need to use updated mortality tables, which we talked about earlier, needs to be updated on an ongoing basis. This actually is a good thing because the longer expected life you have in the pension calculation, that actually means there's more annuity payments that need to be factored in, which in turn increase the lump sum. So let's jump into the next piece of this, which is segment rates. So I mentioned that there are different segments coming up as it relates to the ExxonMobil pension. So segment 1 is shorter term rates. These are anywhere from 6 months to 5 years. Now, segment 2 rates are from 5.5 to 20 years. Segment 3 are from 20.5 to 60 years. And as you can see, shorter term rates can be more volatile, but each segment of rates uniquely affects the pension calculation. And recently, segment rates have come off their historic low, and we'll talk about that a little bit in the next few slides. So, okay, important to know, only the last 2 months in the quarter are used for calculating the segment rates. So drilling down on the items I discussed on the last slide is just that. Only the last 2 months in the quarter are used for actual segment rates. So Bogart actually tracks these daily rates for each segment, and we compare them to the published data to form our projection. So keep in mind that the rates in the first month of the quarter, while they don't count, they do give us an indication of where we believe rates are headed. So on the left-hand side of this slide here, if it says actual, then these are the numbers that have been published by the IRS. If it says projected, then this is our internal projections here. The right side of the slide here illustrates how we make the projection as the month is in progress. Namely, we start with what was the last known month. In this case, that would have been prior to March. So, for that month, we have what the IRS published as the segment rates and what the Federal Reserve Economic Database, this is sometimes called as FRED, what FRED published the corporate bonds for various maturities. And we track how the corporate bonds change during the month. We also track how Treasury bonds change during the month, even though that's not on this slide. So we look at how the average has changed from the last known month to the current month. From there, we make 3 different projections and then average the 3 to get our own projection. So let's talk about the last slide in a little bit of a different manner. So before I get to that, it's important to note the annuity option is not affected by the changes in rates we're discussing here. For the non-grandfathered folks, you know that there are 3 groups of interest rates that apply to you, the 3 segments, segment 1, segment 2, segment 3, but it may be hard to look at 3 different rates. Potentially, one's moving up, one's moving down. It's hard to get an understanding of exactly how much these interest rates have changed the bottom line. Well, we help calculate what would be a single rate equivalent so you can more easily measure the quarter-to-quarter changes in rates. So, for example, if you're comparing Q2 2025 to our Q3 2025 rates, just by looking at the 3 segments quarter over quarter, it's hard to see what the projected difference is. But look at the retire at 55 single rate equivalent. You'll see the actual Q2 rates of about 5.3 and the projected Q3 rates of a little bit more, 5.4. So that is a way that we can actually measure changes a little bit easier. All right. In the last few slides, we talked about how short-term moves in the single rate equivalent can affect non-grandfathered folks. Well, we also want to give a historical look and point out that corporate rates, similar to Treasury rates, they've actually moved well below the highs that we saw in the 80s and 90s. And actually, during the pandemic, when the Fed took interest rates to the lowest level in decades, coming out of that, what we saw is rates moved higher. But they remain well below, as you can see here on the left, well below the highs of a few decades ago. So if there's any questions on the rate projections themselves, a Bogart advisor is always happy to discuss the potential impact on your financial plan. Now, we've discussed the interest rates and what interest rates are used for as it relates to the ExxonMobil pension. Now let's discuss how they impact the lump sum. And one of the things to think about is that when you retire, you actually don't have to elect the pension. This is something that you would need to work with your Bogart advisor on, and we'll talk about whether that makes sense. So in the next couple slides, what we're really trying to look at is a deep dive into the lump sum calculations themselves. Note the interest rates do not impact the annuity values. And in this case, we want to discuss the impact of age, life expectancy, and interest rates on your pension. So, for example, we're assuming that a 60-year-old retiree has an annuity value, we'll call it $74,000. If we do the present value of this, that gets you $1 million lump sum even. What are the factors that affect this? Let's talk about life expectancy first. In this example, their life expectancy is 84 years old. And you can see that we model out payments through age 83. During this time, the annuity remains exactly the same, even though the interest rates change. But remember, and this is very important, there's 3 segment rates as it relates to the ExxonMobil pension, and this is a much easier way to see their impact. Segment 1 is the first 5 years, segment 2 is years 6 through 20, segment 3 is the remaining years. And so what we're really looking at in this example is a segment rate of 4.66, segment 1 rate, that is, segment 2 rate of 5.27, segment 3 rate of 5.6, and all of these factors the life expectancy, the annuity estimate, and those three segment rates combined would project this retiree's lump sum to be $1 million even. Now, if we were to look at an example where someone were to retire younger, let's say in this example, we're looking at a retirement age of 55, the factors change a little bit. What doesn't change is that the segment rates, segment 1 still applies to the first 5 years, segment 2 applies for years 6 through 20, segment 3 is everything beyond. In this example, segment 1 is 4.66, segment 2 is 5.27, segment 3 is 5.6. But what changed that the annuity is less? Well, now the annuity is about $55,000. It's a material decrease. And the reason that it's less is because there's a reduction in the annuity payout if the benefit is taken early. This haircut actually applies each year the benefit is taken prior to age 60. So you can see that we're assuming the annuity is now about 75% of what it was in the prior example. Now, life expectancy is also 1 year shorter, but there are more annuity payments that need to be factored in because the benefit's actually happening earlier. And while I said segment rates are unchanged, the years in which they are being applied to has changed. So you can see that from 55 to 59, you're applying segment 1, but for a person that is at age 55, you're actually going to have more years in segment 3. And so the segment 3 rate is going to be more impactful to your pension projection and pension value. And looking at this calculation of the single equivalent rate, what it effectively is the internal rate of return that's needed to get the lump sum value using 3 segment rates. This is a little in the weeds, you could say, so if there's any questions about how we get this single equivalent rate, please let your Bogart advisor know. We're happy to walk through it in detail. So a question we help a lot of folks try and decipher is, how do changes affect my lump sum? So let's continue with the previous example. And in that example, the lump sum for a 60-year-old retiree was $1 million, and the single rate equivalent was about 5.2. As we think about what changes in rates would do in this example, let's consider a few rules of thumb. Number one, 1% interest rate change is about a 10% change in the lump sum, either positive or negative. Anything less than a 1% change in interest rates, you can assume it's kind of a linear relationship. So when we look at going from April to March, the discount rate actually steps up a little bit. The lump sum would decrease in value by an equivalent amount, 3.7%, or about $37,000 as it relates to $1 million of a lump sum. All right. This slide is designed to build on that 60-year-old retiree example. You may be wondering, why is the top bullet crossed out? In the earlier example, we showed a simplified scenario of how one might go about calculating the lump sum from the annuity, and you can see that there is actually a kind of higher shift in the assumed discount rates, which in turn made the lump sum value lower. But remember, and this is so important, it does not change the annuity value. The only thing that's changed is the interest rates, and the interest rates in turn have changed the lump sum value. So should I retire now and delay the lump sum? Very frequent question that we've gotten with the recent rise in interest rates. When you're considering delaying the pension, I want to add a quick note. Delaying is only for the qualified portion. The non-qualified portion, the APP and the SPP, they pay out when you've retired. You cannot delay them. But it's important to think about, for the qualified portion, you may want to delay. And everyone's situation as it relates to the decision to delay is completely different. And there's a different, set of factors that you want to talk to your advisor about. When are you going to need the money? Are you retiring prior to age 60? And as we think about the interest rate future, what might that do to your valuation? And in turn, how is that going to impact your financial plan? This is one of the biggest benefits of having a financial advisor on your team to help map out the ripple effect of some of these decisions. So when thinking about some of the items that need to be made in retirement, Bogart Wealth has actually created a list here of the key events to be mindful of for folks at ExxonMobil that are retiring. Let's go to a little bit more of a detailed version of this slide. You can see here that this is an example of the retirement roadmap. Someone with a benefit commencement date in June. Typically, you want to inform your supervisor anywhere from 90 to 120 days out. This will include things like, what's the last day on the payroll, first day of retirement, what the BCD date is. In addition, you want to talk or get either online or in paper your retirement package. And after you receive that pension kit, you would need to review it, potentially get it notarized. And at this point, you'll review the lump sum annuity election form, the qualified rollover form, address verification form. You'll also look at the non-qualified pension election form. And you, in order to get your BCD or your benefit on time, should return this at least 35 days prior to when you want your benefits to start. Don't forget, it's also important to change the medical plan payment method on the ExxonMobil benefits website. Fast forward 1 to 2 days of the BCD, a lump sum check will be delivered to you in the mail. Supplemental pension, if applicable, like I said, not everybody has that, is paid via payroll. Next, you can either bring the check to our office, deliver it through UPS to Bogart Wealth, and then we want to meet with you to finalize the plan for cash flows, the portfolio allocation, the tax planning. If there's net unrealized appreciation we're doing with stock and Voya, we want to review all that. Now, 5 to 10 days after retirement, we want to do or evaluate a savings plan rollover call with Voya. 15 days after the rollover, the savings plan check is received by us, and the ExxonMobil IRA shares are also received by us. And we ask that if you do net unrealized appreciation, the statement is emailed over to us. Now, there's a lot to this process, but we want to help. We want to answer any questions that you have. So as you're looking at this, if there's anything you want clarification on or want us to talk about, feel free to give us a ring. So just to conclude, a couple things to consider now when planning for retirement. If you don't have a plan, make sure you get one. It can be very helpful to develop a plan to alleviate any uncertainty as you transition to retirement. If you don't have a plan, Bogart Wealth would love to help you create one. And one of the most underrated parts of a plan that we've noticed working, with thousands of families is a budget. It might not be the most fun exercise creating a budget, but it's crucially important that you have a budget to monitor spending all throughout retirement. Now, this budget helps you determine your financial planning needs, helps with tax planning, retirement planning, investment planning. It all comes together. Lastly, I'd say it's very important to understand what is your long-term risk profile, and that really needs to be factored in when deciding what to do with your pension. So an advisor helps break down all these strategies. And speaking of advisors, we'll conclude today's presentation, about interest rates at this point. But if you don't have a financial plan, there's never a bad time to take the steps to get one. And at Bogart Wealth, we're happy to meet with you to learn about your situation and how we might be able to help. So when you're looking for a financial advisor, here's a couple things that you may want to know. Are they a certified financial planner? Is it someone who has experience with your retirement plan? Are they up to date on the latest tax laws? And one of the most underrated ones is, do they speak in a way that you understand and feel comfortable with? So just some things to consider. But as I mentioned, we're more than glad to meet with everybody in terms of doing a preliminary financial plan. If you have any questions, here is our contact information. And with that, I want to thank you for joining today's webinar. For future webinars and content, feel free to follow us, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube. We have been putting out a tremendous amount of new resources for the folks we work with. With that, I want to thank everyone for listening, and we will talk to you soon.